Hello, Booktube. Welcome to another fiction review. On a personal note, and as you know, personal opinions are not what I like to include in my book reviews, and that's why I'm saying it now, before we get started. The novel we're talking about today, I found unusually comforting, and I looked forward to every opportunity that I had to sit down and read it, because I knew that the novel was going to make me feel sheltered and cushioned, far away from whatever had happened to me during the day, and certainly far away from whatever was happening on the news. If you could use a book like that right now, stay tuned. Today we are reviewing The Vulnerables by Sigrid Nunez, published in 2023. It was a library loan for me, but it was a recommendation. I got it out of the library because sluggish reader, and I'm so sorry to him because I've looked through his playlist trying to find the video where he talked about the book because he was so enthusiastic about it. And I thought, wow, he loves this book. I'm going to read it. I'm going to find if I can read it. It's 240 pages. The text on the page is really large. I don't know. I'll try and hold it up to camera just now. You can get a glance. We can see very large text, lots of spacing, lots of white space around all that text. My favorite kind of book, really, because it just makes for such relaxed reading. Maybe that's part of the reason I enjoyed it so much. But if I was to sum up the novel in a sentence, I will quote the author herself, who said, "Elegy plus comedy is the only way to express how we live in the world today." This is comic, but not black comedy exactly, because black comedy, to me, always seems grounded in anger or fear. Sigrid Nunez's novel grounds its comedy in grief and suffering, such that when you are smiling, because you probably won't guffaw, but sometimes you might laugh, but you're laughing in recognition that something is so true. The novel will remind you of those times that a friend shared a story with you and you said something like, "Oh, isn't that so true?" or "Doesn't that happen all the time?" Our author information, Sigrid Nunez, was born in 1951 in New York. She graduated from Barnard College and got her MA at Columbia University, and after graduation from college, she worked as an editorial assistant for the New York Review of Books. But it was late before she published her own fiction. 1995, her first novel was written. Now, regarding The Vulnerables, did it do well when it came out? Oh, wow. Did it ever? It was named the best book of 2023 by NPR, Kirkus, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, San Francisco Chronicle, The New Republic, The Irish Times, She Reads, and it was a Goodreads staff top pick. You will find in my description box a link to her website so you can go see her other novels, because I believe the one called The Friend, or My Friend, there we go, I've forgotten the title already, is supposed to be another fantastic book. So let's talk about the structure. What is this book that I'm acting so excited about? It is a first-person narrative, and the narration is focused around one character, the protagonist, who is an older woman, an author. Now, I called this a postmodern novel, and it is. The novel doesn't strictly move through linear time. Yes, it does in a way, and also no, it doesn't, because it interrupts itself to move about in time. It is, however, a pandemic novel, and that is what is important about the setting. The setting is New York, but it's New York between March 2020 and the beginning of June 2020, when the city reopened after COVID-19 lockdown. So you've got the place, you've got the time, but also it is a postmodern novel because you are also making journeys inside the mind of the narrator while she is having to stay in one place as best she can. She's not very good at it, but while she's trying to maintain COVID-19 lockdown. And the mind wanderings take up a great portion of the book, and that makes the narrative all jumbled and moving about in time and kind of foggy, dreamy, unreal. I don't know what your pandemic experience was like, but certainly it felt very close to mine. I know it happened. I have memories of certain standout moments, but the truth is that whole time, 2020 as a whole, and some of 2021 for me in the UK, just a blur, and nothing seems to be in focus. And I have a hard time remembering exactly how long things took or when lockdowns began and ended. It all just messes together. There aren't a lot of characters in the book. I think the named characters, there are about 6 in total, and one of those is a parrot. The title, though, is meaningful because all the characters, in one way or another, are put at risk by the pandemic. The narrator is over 60. She lives alone. She ends up sharing an apartment with a parrot whose owners have been stranded in a completely different state, so they can't look after the bird, and a college dropout who has mental health issues suddenly turns up in that same apartment. He was the one who was supposed to be looking after the parrot, but didn't show. So all these people coming together. The narrator does, therefore, a lot of mental dealing with all her issues. She travels into her past in her mind. She's a tourist of her past, if you like, because she's got nowhere else she can go, although she tries to get out into the city. She takes longer walks than the COVID-19 lockdown rules strictly allow. She's just trying to continue to have a life. And so you get her thoughts on history, on art, on psychology. So the story, if you can even identify a story thread, and it's very thin, it pops up sort of occasionally into the book, but in between is all this stuff coming out of her mind. It reminds me of another book I stumbled on browsing through Amazon called The Marmalade Diaries, which was where an 80-year-old woman is accidentally, unintentionally quarantined with a 20-something single man. Because the book is so postmodern in its structure, some people are going to find some things really positive that other people, a completely different reader is going to find negative. So I'm not going to really talk about pros and cons. I'm going to talk about what the book is. And I'm sure that you listening and watching will know exactly whether that for you is a pro or a con. So first off, the narrative isn't plot driven, and I wouldn't say it's character driven. It's emotionally evocative. You are quarantined inside the mind of the narrator who's trying to deal with a young man she doesn't want to share an apartment with. The text also, it reads a little bit like a notebook. There are a lot of broken up paragraphs where the author is partly keeping a writing journal, partly keeping a diary, partly just letting herself remember. You read this collection of short entries, and there may or may not be some connection with what's really going on in her present. And it does evoke the strangeness of the COVID-19 lockdown. It's a sampler of the strange things our minds did, the strange way that people reacted to things, the strong emotions that we felt at times that we weren't quite expecting to feel them. The ways we found out that we were very strong, and also the ways we found out we were very weak. The overriding theme, though, in the book, and I think I would call this a theme-driven novel rather than plot-driven or character-driven. It's emphasizing the compassion and the patience and the kindness that we need to give each other during these unusual times. Of course, a novel where the themes are compassion and kindness probably is going to show some moments of the opposite kind of behavior to make a point. And so there is problematic content. There's trolling. There are questionable relationships. A lot of people are in very questionable, not so good relationships. There are confrontations. And these are often distant memories. So I don't know. I mention that in case it makes a difference to some readers whether the bad thing happens right then in the present moment or whether someone's just remembering something that happened a decade ago. And the book divides into 3 parts. It has a part 1, then an interlude, then a part 2. I could not see any point to that division, and maybe there is a point. I'm not saying there might not be. It might need a reread or a slow read to comprehend why the divisions. It made me think of a concert or a play, because they tend to be divided up. There's one bit of watching, then you get an intermission, then you watch the rest. If anybody does have an idea, if they've read the book and they do know how the divisions are meaningful, by all means, leave a comment. We will all be enlightened then. The notebook entries in The Vulnerables that I spoke about, they reminded me a great deal of Natalie Goldberg's books, Wild Mind or Writing Down the Bones. And I'm going to read a passage that just gives you a flavor of those kinds of entries. Quoting from page 140, 141, and 142, just some random little snatches. When you're having trouble writing, get up, go out, take a walk in the street. You will discover that certain streets exist precisely for this purpose. Once I saw a man, homeless by the look of him, digging through the trash. He pulled out a couple of sheets of newspaper, examined them, and threw them back. Fishing deeper, he hauled up a magazine, squinted at the cover, and threw it back. And then he walked away. There ain't nothing to read in these cans anymore, he said. I like that Virginia Woolf said, everything I read these days, including my own work, seems to me too long. But not that Jeanette Winterson said, I think long books are rude. Some writers use pen names so they can be more truthful, others so that they can tell more lies. I like how Lily Tomlin used to introduce one part of her act. The following skit is about my parents. I have changed their names to protect their identities. I like John Banville's paraphrase of Bennett. Writers don't suffer as much as other people. There is always a sheet of paper, there is always a pen, there is always a way out, wrote H.L. Mencken, who nevertheless hoped that his life would not last too long. I wanted to write a comic novel, then realized I had my own life to hand. I can tell the story of my life in just 4 words. Good times, bad times. There is a lot of creative writing advice sprinkled throughout this book and dropped into the narrative. It made me wonder, how many novels are there where the main character is a writer? It seems to me that it happens often, maybe too often, but it occurs to me that I have never kept track. And so I think I might do a coffee break or a sideline video on that sometime. Just go back and look at books that I've read and note how many have writers, either as their main character or there is a significant character in the book, very close to the main character, who is a writer. I'm not saying I think it's bad or, well, I don't know. Am I? I suppose I worry that maybe there are stories not being told about people who live lives who are not writers. But then I hear the opposite argument. I hear that lots of other jobs are boring and they restrict the amount of free time that the protagonist has to do things. You know, if you work a 9-to-5 job and you have kids and, you know, how much time do you have to, I don't know, investigate a crime? It gets a bit tricky. Whereas it helps if you're a writer. You have lots of free time in the day and you can choose how you spend it. What do you think? Again, all comments gratefully received. And that's the review done. I thought I would close in a different way, just by reading one of the loveliest, most comforting little passages for me, and that was about the time that the narrator spends with the parrot. This is from page 101, 102, and 103. He had a slew of toys designed for activities parrots do in the wild, foraging, climbing, chewing, shredding, and for the simple pleasure of making noise, bells and rattles, and a dollar coin-sized tambourine. Iris had left instructions for versions of various games to play, like fetch and hide and seek. He had a bowling set, 3 tiny pins that he knocked down expertly every time with a small rubber ball. He also had a miniature shopping cart that he liked to fill with toy groceries and roll around the floor. Whoever thought of that for a bird? He seemed to enjoy most being asked to pick which of 3 cups the cashew was hidden under, after I'd rapidly switched them around, not because it was much of a challenge, I thought, but because he got to eat a cashew. And the narrator ends that chapter by saying, witnessing innocent animal happiness is, as everyone knows, one of our species' great joys. I will end on that note. Look forward to seeing you again, everyone, at the weekend for another Middlemarch meditation. Take care in the meantime. Bye-bye.